What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Loop Live. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm your host of the Loop Live show, and today we have a great guest. We've got Ross Fishburn from Equip Worship. And so we're going to talk about what Equip Worship is offering worship leaders. We're going to be also talking about thinking sonically as a worship band and what that means and how that will enhance what you're doing on a Sunday morning, on a Thursday night in rehearsal. He's going to give us a ton of tips on thinking sonically as a worship band. Wherever you're watching this from, if you've got a question, if you've got a comment, write it down in the chats wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube. We might take some live questions. And without further ado, here is Ross Fishburn. Ross, what is going on, man?
Greetings. Hey, Matt. It's good to see you again.
So you are running Equipped Worship, equippedworship.com. Is that the URL?
That's it, equipworship.com.
Tell us what is Equipped Worship?
Oh, man, Equip Worship. So it's a few months old. This platform came out of a passion to weekly and relationally invest in worship leaders, worship teams. So there's a lot of information out there, a lot of digital information. And, you know, what I've discovered in my, 20 years of worship leading and producing music is most worship leaders don't receive one-on-one mentoring. And so we're trying to provide a platform where there can be a relational one-on-one mentor to mentee relationship that's formed over months at a time to really support and serve worship leaders and worship teams in the local church.
That's awesome, man. So
Yeah.
what is it that you're a musician, right? What do you play?
Man, what do I play? So over the last few years professionally, I've played drums and bass with Shane and Shane primarily in the worship initiative. Still doing that as much as I can.
Yeah,
But as a worship leader, I typically would lead from acoustic guitar.
that's awesome. So
It's hard to say. It's hard to say that I play keys, but I did pass piano proficiency in my undergrad, so that counts, right?
yeah. How long have you been involved in worship music?
Almost 20 years. If you count high school, since I was 16, so I'm 36, 20 years.
Long time. So you've got this whole idea of thinking sonically. What does that mean when we say thinking sonically from a worship band perspective? Maybe you're in a rehearsal or a Sunday morning, setup. What is this idea of thinking sonically?
So we're not talking about is Sonic the Hedgehog for all of you who pictured Sonic the
man,
Hedgehog.
I miss that
Which
game.
I miss that game. I miss my Sega Genesis, man. So thinking sonically in terms of considering the frequency your instrument produces. So that's what we're talking about. So there's this sonic spectrum, right? And I'm no front of house expert, but there's a spectrum of 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz where all of these frequencies from all of these instruments, drums, bass, keys, electric guitar, vocals, everything falls in this spectrum. And thinking sonically is considering where your instrument falls on that spectrum.
Yeah. And every musician in your band can be thinking sonically, because I do think it's interesting that, let me just throw this example out to you and see if I'm kind of on the right track. I was playing in a worship band a couple weeks ago, and there was someone playing acoustic guitar. There's two acoustic guitar players. I was playing acoustic. The other person was playing acoustic. We were in a song that was very quiet. I think it was What a Beautiful Name at the very beginning, right? It's just very quiet, piano driven. And the acoustic player from the very, very beginning of the song was just strumming full on all the way through from top to bottom and never, ever stopped strumming. Is that kind of the idea of thinking about where does your instrument fit? in the overall song in the band?
A little bit. So that would be, I would think more what you just said would be thinking rhythmically and in terms of parts. But there's also this third component of sonically thinking. And I think the misconception is that it's all up to the front of house engineer to determine where your instrument lands sonically, which is true.
Yeah.
That's not false. But I think more so what I'm thinking about is if that acoustic guitar player was playing low and strumming a lot and you decided to capo high, well you're out of his register and out of his sonic range
Right.
in his
Right.
sonic world a little bit more. Or maybe a better example is, since I'm a bass player, is determining when you're going to play high on the song and when you're going to play low on the song
Yep.
really can determine and inform the dynamics of a song, because the low frequencies emote differently than the high frequencies. So you create
Mm.
different emotion when you play low versus when you play high.
Interesting. So sonically too, then would be, how your drum heads sound, or your tone of your electric guitar, or the type of pickup you're using with your acoustic guitar, that type of thing.
Yeah,
Basically, not
yeah,
leaving it all up to the front of house to EQ your guitar. Send them a good sounding instrument so that they don't have to do any EQ, right?
yeah. Start at the source. I think what I've learned over the years of working in the studio um, is start at the source. So as a drummer, like most oftentimes the problems can be fixed at the source. So the drum head
Yeah.
or how you're
Yeah.
hitting the drum. And that just serves the front of house engineer so well, because
Yeah.
their source is beautiful and
Yeah.
set up well. And then
Yeah.
they have a lot more to work with versus trying to fix problems.
What instrument do you think in worship is the most susceptible to this problem?
Oh man. I mean, you have to start with the drums, just because the drums cover such a wide spectrum sonically.
Yeah.
From, you consider the kick drum super low frequencies versus the hi-hats and the snare and the cymbals
Yeah.
producing really high frequencies. And so it's such a wide range. And so I would start with the drums.
What's funny is it seems like a lot of times the drum mic isn't even placed correctly at all. So like people are like the kick drum sounds horrible, but the kick drum mic is like 4 feet away.
Right.
Not even really even on there. So,
Yeah, totally.
even the sound team has to think, well, that's more of like technical for sonic thinking. But I think it is
Yeah,
interesting though for the instruments to start thinking that the source needs to also be quality. And that's something
yeah,
that you're totally right that I think is overthought a lot of times. So you're like, oh well, the sound guy will take care of that. And we're not actually thinking about, are we sending them a quality bass sound or an electric guitar
yeah,
sound or key sound? Because
yeah.
it's
And I can
hard.
speak. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Matt. Sorry. I can just speak to that real quickly. Like, oftentimes, at least with Shane and Shane, I play this little tiny drum kit that's like a 14-inch kick, 14-inch tom, 14-inch
Yeah.
snare. And typically, I'm using these cajon brushes that I think Vader
Yep.
makes these cajon brushes. They're like really thick, like, I don't know, this bigger. That's a bad example on video, but they're really thick black brushes that are used for cajones. And um, people will come up to me after a concert or after a worship night that we're playing somewhere, and they'll say, "Man, how do you get these small drums to sound so big?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a lot of different things. One is EQing it. It's an eccentric drum kit, so EQing it correctly is,
Yeah.
it takes some work and massaging. However,
Yeah.
these little brushes pull out all of the low end tone from these drums, versus if I were to play with hot rods or drumsticks, the tone would be completely different. And so I would just say, and I think this is applicable to the majority of churches, when we consider most churches are under 100 people uh, in our country, at least, that man, you can take something really small and something really simple and think about the source, think about the brushes that you're using or the sticks you're using or the heads you're using,
Yeah.
and create something really beautiful in terms of tone. So yeah, I hope that's a helpful example.
Yeah, just the tools you're using can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
So, what would you say for a musician who's playing in a worship band? What's a way that they can contribute their instrument without maybe clashing with other instrumentation in the band? Like, how do you fit in a mix, or how do you fit in a worship
Mm,
band with your instrument? Are there some tips that you have to give worship leaders of what
mm.
they're thinking about as they're playing?
Yeah. I mean, these may seem very obvious, but listen to one another. You're
Mm,
listening to one another's parts and you're listening to one another sonically. So oftentimes, like as a bass player, for example, I'm considering the keys player
yeah,
because most often the left hand of the keys player is sitting in the bass guitar range sonically. So
yeah,
there's a buddy, close buddy named Adam that I play with all the time, and we're always having these conversations. He's such an awesome keys player, thinks sonically, and he's also trying to create emotion with his instrument, right? So a lot of times he'll be playing these big octaves in his left hand, like
yeah,
big octaves in the left hand, and we'll just have to communicate. Like, is this your turn to go low? Or is it my turn to go low? And is the front of house engineer in this
right,
conversation with us and all of that? So I would just say listening to one another and being very communicative in in how
yep.
you plan parts together. Um, Man, Matt, one of the I don't know if you know Michael Olson. He's a Chicago guy like you. Are you familiar with him?
I no. Where does he play?
He he played drum. Well, he's a worship leader in Jacksonville now, but he played drums with Michael W. Smith and Stephen Curtis Chapman for years, probably a decade. And I don't want to take credit for this, but he said once in a clinic, he actually came and spoke to our worship team probably over a decade ago, and he used 1 Corinthians 12 as sort of a parallel to help us think sonically and dynamically and how parts fit together. And First
Mhm.
Corinthians 12 is all about unity and diversity of the gifts in the church. So all of my theologians out there, I know what it's about. But this is a really great this is a really great parallel in terms of band dynamics. Like for example, in
Yeah,
First Corinthians 12, it says, uh, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And later on, it says, if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. And so it's just this concept of if I'm the bass player, I might be the hand of the body, and the drummer might be the eye of the body, and the keys player might be the foot of the body, and the vocals might be the nose of the body, so on and so forth. And none of the parts are indispensable, but we all complement one another and work together to create a unified
hmm,
body. And
yeah,
so I just always loved using 1 Corinthians 12 as a way to describe how your worship team fits together, how your choir fits together, your orchestra fits together, whatever that looks
yeah.
like. Um, so does that make sense?
It totally does, because I
It's been
think
so
it's
helpful.
important. It's important too that people in the team see that they're a part of a team. That it's not like the drummer show, it's not the electric guitar player show, but that they have a specific role to play that only they can play, and that other people in the team also have specific roles that they play that only they can play. And it's being mindful of everybody's part, and that together we're stronger, together we sound better, if we're also like waving other people's flags, and letting other people
Mm,
um, kind of live in that music sonic space instead of just like
yes.
playing over everybody. Because if you play over everybody, it doesn't do good for anyone,
Yeah,
not for the team,
exactly.
not
And
for the
and
church.
yeah, and Matt, I actually wrote this down because this is something I like abide by when I'm playing bass or any instrument. The more fills you play, the less they mean, and the lack of fills makes the fill you choose great. So
Hmm.
I'll say that one more time because it's so good. For every instrument, the more fills you play, the less they mean, and the lack of fills makes the fill you choose to play great. And so I had this conversation with a buddy who's just a monster on the drum kit. We were recording an album. We wrote some songs for the church, and we were recording these albums. And he just had this nasty, like 2, 3, 4 bar fill that he could just shred. But he did it like 4 or 5 times in the song. And
Hmm.
I was like, bro, if you just let's just choose to like insert that fill one time in this song to give this moment a massive lift in the song, and it'll make that feel so much more special versus playing it 4 or 5 times and it losing its meaning and significance.
Hmm. That's true. I
And
think
that
that's
was
also
really
true for
helpful.
vocalists. I think that's
Yeah.
also true for
Yep.
vocalists, being very mindful of when you try to do octave jumps or ad libs. Because if you do it too much, it kind of steals away. Well, it just kind of defeats the purpose of doing it again and again and again. Where if you save it,
Mhm.
it matters more.
Yep.
Um, it's such interesting thinking, and it's something that for sure I think comes natural to professional musicians, people who are doing it for a living over and over and over and over. And maybe not naturally, but maybe you've just learned how to do it as you've done it more and more and more. But what about a church who doesn't have professional musicians? Like just volunteer musicians who maybe play once or twice a month. During the week, 9 to 5, they're an insurance salesman, and they
Mhm.
pick up their
Mhm.
guitar or play drums like twice a month, maybe. How do you get volunteers to start thinking like that? Because it really is a mindset. It's something you have to really train yourself.
Yep. Yeah, I would say rehearse, observe, rinse and repeat. And if there's any way for the worship leader to provide playback options, for example, recording the rehearsal and you listening back,
Mm,
that's what changed my whole world. I mean, the way that I thought about music, it developed my ear, developed my ear for other instruments, So for a while, when I was a worship leader and music director at a church, we would have Thursday night rehearsals. We would record rehearsal, and then I would send the rehearsal out to the whole band to listen over the next couple of days, just to, uh, like keep their heart focused on what we were about to do, and also um, help remind them of the songs and the parts and all of that. Keep it fresh for them, right? Um,
yeah.
so they would listen to that recording, and then Sunday morning would come around. It would be fresh on their ears and on their hearts, and then we would record the Sunday morning service. And on Monday morning, I would send out some notes with some feedback, just some super encouraging notes for every person. And this was a volunteer band. So super encouraging notes and then some constructive criticism that helped them develop and grow. And they ate it up, man. They loved it. You know what? It's
Wow.
like what musician doesn't want to hear themselves? It's hard to hear yourself, but you also want to hear back
What
what
people
you
really
just
think.
played. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So
And hear
so
yourself.
just feedback.
Wow. And that can be a hard thing to do well, where people don't get their feelings hurt. And doing it in a way that's constructive, positive,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
I mean,
put
prod
some positive things around the negative.
yeah, like, I just think people over projects is such a
Yeah.
important thing that we need to have
Yeah.
have a sticky note on our dashboard every morning
Yeah.
when we get in the car, people over projects.
You had a great point earlier about the acoustic guitar thinking sonically by the power of the capo. And I'm totally a believer that
Mm,
there's a power in the capo. If there's two acoustic guitar players, they shouldn't be playing the same chord facings. Like someone else should play capo 5 while the other person's just playing like normal C.
mhm,
I also
mhm.
find too in songs where I'm like, this is feeling very thin, the sound. If I'm like capo 5, I pull that capo off and I play it without a capo to add
Yeah,
more low end to fill out the sound of the song. Not like the acoustic guitar is gonna do it, but I'm gonna do my part. And I think if every instrument is thinking about it that way, like this is sounding thin or this is sounding too full or muddy, what is it that you can do with your part to eliminate that, to make it sound better?
Mm,
Are there any tips you
mm.
have for worship keys? Kind of like the capo. What about worship keys or electric guitar? Do you have any like quick tips for those instruments?
Oh yeah. I mean, with keys and electric guitar, there's so many effects and so many additional delay and verb and all these things that you can add. So, all that plays a part, but yeah, if it's feeling thin, I would first consider um where are my hands on the instrument, on the source. So determine the source first, and determine the sounds that you're providing with all of
Mhm,
your effects. Start there, and then consider front of house. So, for example, oftentimes I'll be playing with Shane, for example, and it's like a trio. It's like Shane on a vocal and acoustic guitar, Shane, the other Shane on just a vocal, and then a drummer. And a lot of times we'll have just a keys player, so no bass.
mm,
So we'll supplement with tracks sometimes, but other times we'll play with no tracks. However, the difference is Shane always has the front of house engineer put his acoustic guitar in the subs a little bit. So
mm,
he's mixing his acoustic guitar into the subs to provide some of that low end frequency that is lacking due to no bass player. We'll also treat our low tom like a kick. So
mhm,
one of the first things we say is, "Hey, this low tom," we'll say this to the front of house engineer, "Hey, this low tom, just treat it like a secondary kick." And what happens is I'll ride on the low tom a lot, and it'll just create all this low end frequency, and you really don't miss the bass guitar in those
mm,
moments. And so just to circle back, I would say in terms of keys and electric guitar and acoustic guitar and all of that, just think like where are my hands sitting? What range frequency wise? Where are they sitting? Where I'm able to support the entire
mm,
uh, band.
mhm.
So yeah, and just comes back to what you just said. Like
Yeah,
you were capoed 5, it felt thin, so you took the capo off and played
yeah,
lower. I would
yeah.
say the same thing for an electric guitar and a keys player. Just consider sonically where you're landing.
You have to be thinking about it, and, now that I think about it again, I'm like, you know what? What it requires is you to know your instrument and to have the skill to even be able to pull off the capo and play it in an entire different,
Yeah,
chord
yeah,
phases. And I
yeah.
think that might be one of the problems is that worship musicians
Mm,
just kind of practice a song one way, capo 5, and
G
that's the way
shapes.
that they have the song memorized. If you were to tell
Yep.
them, "Okay, now remove the capo and play it in C," it would it might, short circuit something. And
Hmm.
they're like, "I don't know how to do that." So,
Yep.
if you don't have the skill, it makes it a little harder to make those types of changes in the moment. And that is
Hmm.
good musicianship, and knowing your instrument, knowing different chord voicings that you can use, um, for that. For keyboards, knowing all the different patches that you could go to if something's sounding too muddy, or different octaves, or knowing how to transpose the keyboard, or knowing just how to play it in B flat instead of transposing it. Um, Gosh, there's so
Yep.
many tips I feel like you could give, but really it is learning your instrument better and then training your
Yep.
ear to actually listen for how is my instrument going to sit in this mix better.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah, and
tell us,
I would
yeah,
say, Matt, like my just for me to bring it home, like I grew up in a church of 150 people and I was playing on an electric drum kit. I mean, that's how I grew up playing in worship, you know,
yeah.
and
Dun,
that's
dun, dun,
pretty
dun, dun.
normal. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Dun, dun,
exactly.
dun, dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun.
Where's that hip hop patch, man? I need to
Yeah.
turn that hip hop setting up, you know? Um, but um, yeah,
The cymbals were the worst. Those
yeah,
are the hardest to
yeah.
get the most like dynamics out of.
Yeah, and the person in the front row can hear my sticks clicking the rubber pads on the electric
Yeah.
drum kit,
Louder than
you
the
know?
cymbal.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's it's been years and years of listening back to myself play
Yeah.
in the studio and at church, to where my ears were really open to
Mm.
um, thinking sonically over just the parts that I'm playing. So
Yeah. So many good tips there, man. I appreciate even just having the conversation to bring up the idea. This is actually the first time in all the interviews I've done on Loop Community that I think anybody's actually ever brought up that topic or that idea. I've
mm,
talked to so many people about just like how to do better rehearsals, how to fit dynamically with each other more, but no one's ever brought up the idea of sonic, um, which is a
mm.
pretty important aspect when you think about it as an instrument. That
Well, and
sonic is
I
kind of
think
everything in that.
it solves a lot of problems
Hmm.
if you are considering sonically how am I fitting. For example, the
Hmm.
number one worship leader complaint I would guess is probably the cymbals are too loud or the
Yeah.
hi-hats are too loud.
Yeah.
Well, that's because they're really loud, high frequency instruments,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And so if the drummer can think, man, I'm either going to not play the cymbals here or I'm just going to play them really, really quietly
Hmm.
and think that way, I
Right.
think not only will you serve your worship leader more, but you'll serve your congregation more uh,
Yeah.
effectively. So, yeah, man.
So, how can people get involved with Equipped Worship? Tell us a little bit about that, what the process looks like,
Yeah.
what
Oh
an
man,
experience, a journey for a worship leader would be like through that.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's super simple to get started. You can go visit equipworship.com and click the get started button. There's like a 3 question get started submission form. And then I'll receive that form and we'll have a 30-minute free conversation about your needs and your ministry context and how I can support you relationally, spiritually, in ministry. And we'll determine your ministry context. We have a team of coaches that are unbelievable, Matt. I don't know if you know of any of. I feel like you probably know a couple of them, but
Yeah, I looked
they're
at the
just
page and a lot of them looked very familiar to me.
they're unbelievable people with 15 to 20 years of ministry experience. Some of them 20 years of music production experience in the studio, front of house engineer experience. Man, the hope is that after our conversation, uh, that I can pair you and recommend you with one of the coaches that will suit you the best.
Mhm.
I look back on especially my younger years of worship leadership and my development. The one thing that I wish that I had was regular mentorship and feedback. There were
Mhm.
just times where I felt emotionally drained. There were times when I wanted to quit
Mhm.
because I just felt extremely insecure in my giftings. I felt like I couldn't handle the pressure of the stage or the lights or whatever my
Mhm.
pastor was asking of me or whatever it was. And I just needed a mentor who had been there and done that to remind me of what is true and
Right.
remind me of what my role is. And so our hope is, uh, I want to really encourage worship leaders to think deeply about their biblical mission and model of worship, Matt. I don't think this is just a hunch, but because this was true of me, I didn't think deeply, biblically, and deeply about what my role was.
Mm.
When you consider the offices of the New Testament, worship leader isn't there. And so, what does it look like to be a modern worship leader in today's church? The office isn't inherently wrong or even unbiblical, but what does it look like to be, maybe according to Ephesians 4, an apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, evangelist first
Yeah.
before you're the song leader? And we see throughout history the worship leader's role is to facilitate the sung prayer of God's people. So that's like real, even
Mhm.
back to all the way back to the Davidic tabernacle, right? Like the Levites facilitating the sung prayer of God's people. But what does it look like for this modern worship leader position? that's only 50 years old. 1960 maybe, the
Yeah.
Jesus movement was like the first time that this kind of position presented itself. And so our hope, man, is just to support the worship leader and the worship pastor in a way where they're thinking deeply about their role and they feel really supported and equipped for the work of the
Mm.
ministry.
I love that, man. I think back on my worship leading journey, and I agree with you that I think I didn't really start growing. I was surviving and, probably moving in some sort of forward motion, but I wouldn't really start growing in depth as a worship leader until I was receiving very direct feedback and coaching every single week. And
Yep.
it was, it had everything to do with like scheduling people and, doing vocal auditions and maybe turning someone down, that type of stuff, like dealing with people issues, but also how to better run rehearsals. Also watching a video every single weekend of my worship leading and critiquing it. And I'll
Yep.
tell you, you will never grow
Yep.
more and faster than from watching a video of yourself lead worship and have people give feedback
It's true.
on how your leadership is. And there's still things that as I'm leading worship, even today, will pop in my head of like, oh yeah, I remember I learned about that in coaching. Don't do this, don't do that, and it helps so much. But a lot of people don't go there because it can be scary, but it's what's going to really help you because otherwise, I mean, don't we all just want to be a little bit more self-aware? I feel like it's actually kind of
Yeah.
scary to not know. I would rather have people give me very direct, honest feedback than not tell me anything or just give me like,
Yeah.
hey, great job this weekend. I want to know, like, deep down what actually was their experience. And
Yes.
even if it kind of stings me a little bit, it's good to know because then you can actually get better. And I think that is way more freeing than being oblivious to it.
Yes, and that's
So
part of the refining process and making us more impactful and effective leaders for the kingdom
yeah,
of God. And that's one of the things that we do, Matt, is weekly rehearsal and service feedback is a part of the personalized development plan. So right
yeah,
now, like I'm coaching a couple people and they're sending me their rehearsal during the week and their service after Sunday morning.
yeah,
And it gives me an opportunity to objectively I don't attend their church, so I can objectively give them leadership feedback, communication
yeah,
feedback, musical feedback, any feedback that they are open to receiving.
yeah.
I can give them that, and so yeah, man, that's a part of it too. And I completely agree that helps us become more effective and impactful as leaders.
I love it, man. It's so good. So everybody needs to go to equippedworship.com. Check out the services offering there. Follow you on Instagram, I'm sure. Is it Equipped to Worship on Instagram?
Equip worship, yeah.
Cool. Go there, follow them. Check out what Ross is doing. Ross, I appreciate you joining us on the Loop Live show and for sharing all this information. That's really, really helpful, really great. And I really hope to watch the Equipped Worship platform grow. And I'm
Mm,
going to be thinking more sonically. I think this is it's actually just
mm,
such a good reminder. I think every worship leader needs to be thinking about that. Every person in a
mm.
worship band needs to be thinking about it. So thanks for bringing that topic up. I love it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yep.
Thanks for having me on, Matt, and it's great to see your face
Yep.
again, buddy.
Yeah, man. You too. Thanks for joining. We'll see you
All
soon.
right, bro. All right, bye bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining Loop Live. So glad that you joined us for that. Such a great conversation with Ross about thinking sonically as a worship band. Whatever you learned, what's one thing that stood out to you in this conversation? Type it down in the comments wherever you're watching this, whether it's on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, whatever. Write down in the comments what's one thing that really stood out to you about this conversation. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to us on Facebook, YouTube, wherever, podcasts, and go check out Equipped Worship. Really, really good stuff there. Get coaching. You will improve as a worship leader, as a worship band member, if you have someone who's actually walking you through all the things that you're facing as a worship leader. There's a lot of challenges as a worship pastor, dealing with people and scheduling and rehearsals and your instrument and building effective worship sets and leading well. There's so many areas that you can just get better in by having someone just kind of come alongside you and coach you through it. So check that out for sure. And thanks for joining us today on Loop Live. We'll see you next time.